The National Energy Regulator of South Africa held its first day of its public hearings in the Gauteng region on Eskom's proposed 16% tariff increase in Midrand at the Gallagher Convention Centre. Eskom CEO Brian Dames highlighted the need for the tariff increase as a means to fund infrastructure and drive economic growth. Questions, however, were raised about the sustainability of this proposed funding model and its impact on the South African consumer. This is what Brian Dames had to say.
We can get revenue from Eskom from three sources. We can get that as equity from our shareholder, we can get that as debt, and for that matter, we can get it from the revenue portion. Now, from our perspective, we have already received 360 billion rand from government as equity, quasi-equity. We have a 350 billion rand guarantee that we use to raise debt. And that is our understanding of the limit of support that Eskom has received. Now, the only other area is the revenue. If we, for that matter, have a lower increase, then we'll have to revert back to government.
That, of course, the CEO of Eskom, Brian Dames. Now, the South African Mineral Resources Minister, Susan Shabangu, has confirmed that the ruling African National Congress has declared coal as a strategic resource during its most recent conference held in Mangaung in December. This at the opening address of the IHS McCloskey Coal Export Conference in Cape Town this morning. Essentially, the designed move is to protect South Africa's reserves, which are responsible for more than 90% of electricity generation in the country. The motion is currently in the public participation phase and will enter Parliament later this year.
Our intention is to make sure that the plan we have as government is such that it continues to allow private participation, but also in managing our resource in a way that will ensure that there's a balance between security of supply locally, but also without losing the global markets.
Now, the legislative framework of coal protection is still being discussed. Industry players say this could take the form of an export levy or a price cap.
We have not decided whether it's an export levy or the nature of that. Those are some of the debates which we've got to engage. And I must say, whatever decisions we reach are not going to be unilateral. We're going to engage stakeholders and would appeal to the coal industry stakeholders to really participate, share with us their experiences, but also be able to come up with proposals which gives the balance between local and our global participation in the coal sector.
To get a view now from organised labour, I'm joined on the line by Labour Federation COSATU spokesman Patrick Craven. Patrick, you've been listening to both Dames and Susan Shabangu. COSATU has taken a very hard line against the proposed electricity tariff increases. Take us through your key reasons for opposing this. We'll come back to Minister Shabangu's announcement of how the, trying to either cap the price of coal or add a levy is trying to put the brakes on the rising electricity prices. But what is COSATU's main objection to the 16% hike as proposed by Eskom?
Well, first of all, it's the effect on the ordinary consumer, particularly, of course, the poorer consumers, who have been facing increased charges already for many years. This isn't just out of the blue. And at the same time as other things are going up. And they're now threatened with e-tolling as well. It's going to be incredibly difficult for people to survive, and many people, we believe, will simply have to stop using electricity altogether, which is not only obviously bad for them, but it also poses dangers. More people using open fires to cook and to heat water and so on. But secondly, two linked issues. One is the possible immediate effect on jobs. Many companies are going to be hard hit by this increase. Many of them are already teetering on the brink of closure, and this could just be the last nail in the coffin. And it isn't just manufacturing industry. We've been getting reports from unions who organize in offices and shops saying that those employers as well pay a huge amount in electricity, and it could be it could lead to at best retrenchments and at worst closures. But this brings me to the fundamental argument that we believe that these tariff increases are completely working against the government and indeed the country's overall strategy to develop our infrastructure and make South Africa an attractive investment a destination for people wanting to invest. And we believe massive increases in the cost of one of the most basic parts of our infrastructure will have exactly the opposite effect. It could completely cancel out the other measures which the government is going to take to improve other forms of infrastructure and ultimately become counterproductive. We believe that the basic capital cost of electricity installations should not be seen as simply a part of a business, which is unfortunately the way Eskom is increasingly being run. And you could hear that from Brian Damas's comments, that he was talking as if he's running a business.
But Mr. Craven, do you not accept that for a very long time electricity prices were incredibly cheap in South Africa, and these kind of massive leap that Eskom is now having to make is simply because the costs are that expensive, and we made the mistake as a country to not invest properly in electricity provision much earlier?
No, the idea that electricity was cheap here has been strongly contested. It was never that cheap. But you're absolutely right on the second point, that a lot of today's problems are caused by a failure to invest in capital projects back in the 1990s, which we believe was part of the attempt to try to first commercialize and ultimately, we believe, privatize Eskom, turn it into a business, and relieve it of all these extra costs. And that was the fundamental mistake. We have to develop our infrastructure. The government agrees with that. It's central to their policy.
Now, Patrick,
but also we should remember one point which I think Brian Damas was hinting at it, but which a lot of people are missing, that if it has a very negative effect, if firms close down, or other firms which might have invested don't, it won't only affect jobs, it won't only affect the economy, but it could mean that ultimately Eskom will actually raise even less money in revenue because fewer and fewer people will be buying its product. And that surely is something which, even from a business point of view, Eskom ought to be aware of. You cannot just keep putting up costs and expect that people will carry on paying in the same way they have in the past.
Now, we've heard also from the Minister for Mineral Resources, Susan Shabangu, speaking today about attempts to introduce some kind of regulation around coal. As we know, that is central to the electricity costs or drivers of electricity costs. What do you make of her suggestion to introduce either a levy or cap the price? Do you think that is a sufficient enough mechanism to put the brakes on these escalating costs we're talking about?
Well, we shall have to look in more detail at precisely what she is recommending. But obviously anything that keeps down the price of coal will play a role. But I think it's very much a short-term measure. In the longer run, and it may well be many years, we have to move away from a source of energy which ultimately, even if it is many years away, is going to become exhausted, and look at alternative forms of particularly more environmentally friendly forms of electricity generation. But as a short-term measure, anything which will make coal cheaper, we will support, just as we would argue the same in relation to the prices of other basic goods where there is a strong monopoly. Steel, for instance, and the concept of import parity pricing. These are things which pose huge burdens on South African manufacturing industry in particular.
Now, the issue of steel is, of course, really critical. The ANC did discuss this at the Mangaung conference, and there was a lot of lobbying for the formation of a public steel company as a way to mitigate some of those challenges in terms of import parity prices. From where COSATU is standing, are you still pushing? I know that there's a Lekgotla this weekend from the ANC. The ANC's allies are invited on the second day of that Lekgotla. Is this something that you'll be taking to the ANC Lekgotla to push further the idea of a publicly owned steel company?
We would, although I think our solution would be a much simpler one, that we should renationalise ArcelorMittal, which is the old ISCOR, and we believe that steel, like electricity, is a vital component of our economic infrastructure, and certainly should be not just run for the private profit of a company, particularly a company which is using this completely indefensible form of pricing, which means we have to pay the price which it would cost to import steel into this country, even when it's actually made here. There can be no justification for that. And the same would apply to any other basic commodity.